I turned 77 last fall. Age is a strange thing. In my head, I'm still 45, but my body reminds me that the years are flying by. Especially in the mornings when my joints ache like I've been carrying bags of cement all night. That's what I did when I was young. Building bridges, not just connecting the banks, but creating structures that would last for centuries. At least that's what we thought back in the 60s. My name is Orrin Stout. It's funny, my last name means strong, sturdy, like the bridges I built. All my life I've prided myself on my ability to build strong things, whether it be structures made of steel and concrete or a family. But something went wrong with family. Apparently, every business has its calculation errors, even the best engineers. Elizabeth, my wife, died 3 years ago. 50 years we were together, half a century. Sounds like an eternity, but it was like a day. Her heart just stopped in her sleep, peacefully, without agony. I woke up in the morning and realized she wasn't breathing anymore. I remember looking at her face, calm, peaceful, and couldn't believe I would never see her smile again. After the funeral, our daughter Yvonne and her husband Quentin and their daughter Tabitha moved in with me. "You don't have to be alone, Daddy," Yvonne said in a tone that tolerated no objection. I was grateful then. The house seemed empty without Elizabeth, and at 74, I was beginning to fear loneliness. Looking back now, I realized they didn't move for me. Quentin had credit problems. He'd invested in some dubious scheme and lost almost all of his savings. Yvonne worked for an insurance company, but her salary was barely enough to pay off their debts. And Tabitha, my 23-year-old granddaughter, couldn't find a job after college and sat on her parents' backs. The house in Toledo that Elizabeth and I had bought back in the 70s was fully paid for. 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a backyard with apple trees Elizabeth planted with her own hands. We bought it at a good price when I got a promotion at my engineering firm. The neighborhood has only improved over the years. It is now one of the most decent neighborhoods in the city. The first few months together were tolerable. Yvonne cooked dinners, trying to replicate her mother's recipes. Quentin helped with minor repairs around the house. Even Tabitha sometimes kept me company watching old movies. But gradually, things changed. At first it was the little things. Yvonne stopped asking me what I wanted for dinner. "You should eat healthy at your age, Daddy," she'd say, placing a plate of bland porridge or salad in front of me. Elizabeth never deprived me of small pleasures like fried potatoes on Fridays or a piece of chocolate cake after Sunday lunch. Then my stuff started to move around. Books I'd left on the coffee table in the living room would mysteriously end up in my bedroom. "We don't want you to trip and fall," Yvonne explained. My comfortable old armchairs had disappeared from the living room, giving way to some gaudy modern furniture Quentin had dragged in from their old house. "Your chairs were taking up too much space, Daddy," Yvonne said when I asked where they'd gone. Later I found them in the garage, covered in dust. My presence in my own home was gradually minimized. The living room was now Quentin's territory with his huge television set, which he turned up to full volume. Tabitha had taken over the kitchen, cooking strange meals for her friends who would come over late at night and make a lot of noise until morning. And I spent more and more time in my bedroom, rereading books or just staring out the window at the apple trees that no one but me had bothered to trim this spring. "Pa, have you seen my credit card?" Yvonne flew into my room without knocking, as she often did lately. "I need to pay for Tabitha's new cell phone and I can't find the card." "No, I haven't seen it," I answered, taking a break from my book. "Can't Tabitha pay for her own cell phones? She's 23 years old." Yvonne rolled her eyes, a gesture I began to notice more and more often when I dared to speak my mind. "Dad, you know how hard it is to get a job these days, especially for young people. She's already sent out dozens of resumes." "In my day." I started, but Yvonne was already leaving the room. Yeah, in your day, everyone got a job as soon as they got out of school," she said over her shoulder. "Times have changed, Dad." I sighed and turned back to the book, but the lines were blurring before my eyes. Yvonne used to be such a sensitive girl. When Elizabeth died, I thought my daughter and I would grow closer. Instead, a wall of misunderstanding and irritation grew between us. My engineering pension is quite decent. I've saved a lot of money over the years. Elizabeth and I had spent most of it on Yvonne's education. She'd graduated from a prestigious college, though I didn't think it was much use. But there were still some savings in my accounts and a few lucky investments. I wasn't rich, but I had enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Now that money was slipping through my fingers. Utility bills had tripled since my daughter's family had moved in with me. Quentin was constantly taking on debt that he never paid back. Tabitha seemed to think of my wallet as an extension of her own. "Grandpa, can I borrow a 20? The girls and I are going to the movies." Tabitha peeked into my room, already dressed for going out, with lipstick and false eyelashes that made her look like a surprised owl. "Sure." I pulled out my wallet. It was weird that she even asked. Usually, money just disappeared from my wallet. "Thank you." She grabbed the bill and kissed my cheek, the first show of affection in weeks. "You're the best." I watched her run out of the room and thought about how little it takes to buy ostentatious love. $20 and I'm the best grandpa ever, until the next $20. In the evenings, when the house was quiet, I would often go out into the garden and sit on a bench under the apple trees. At such times I would talk to Elizabeth. Not out loud, of course, not enough for Quentin or Yvonne to hear and think I was out of my mind. But in my mind I was telling my wife about everything that was going on in our house. "You know, Ellie," I thought, looking up at the stars through the branches of the apple trees, "sometimes I think they're waiting for me to die. They've already planned what they're going to do with the house and the money. Yvonne even asked me last week if I'd made a will." I imagined Elizabeth shaking her head, as she always did when I was too harsh in my judgment. "Don't think badly of them, Orrin," she would say. "They're just confused. We all lose our way sometimes." But I couldn't help thinking about how our daughter had changed. Yvonne grew up in a home full of love. Elizabeth and I were never rich, but we always found a way to give her everything she needed. And not just material things. We taught her to be kind, honest, to respect her elders. Where did all that go? Quentin, her husband, worked as a sales rep for a pharmaceutical company. Once successful, he now spent most of his time at home, claiming to network over the internet. Apparently, those contacts required hours of watching sports channels and a case of beer every night. "Dad, we're thinking about doing a little remodeling in your bathroom," Yvonne said over dinner one night. "Those old tiles look awful." "I'm quite happy with my bathroom," I replied. Elizabeth chose this tile herself. She said the color reminded her of the sea in Cape Cod, where we spent our honeymoon. "For God's sake, Daddy," Yvonne tapped her fork irritably on her plate. "You can't live in the past forever. Mom died 3 years ago. It's time to move on." I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. When did she become so callous? When did she stop understanding what memories meant to someone my age? "Your mother," I said quietly but firmly, "was the best part of my life. And if the tiles in the bathroom help me feel her presence, then she'll be there as long as I live." "Suit yourself," Yvonne snorted. "Just don't complain about the house looking like a museum from the 80s. After that conversation, I noticed Quentin and Yvonne exchanging glances whenever I mentioned Elizabeth, as if I was doing something unseemly by bringing up my late wife, as if my love for her should have died with her. My granddaughter Tabitha was less hostile, but just as aloof. As a child, she often asked me to tell stories about the bridges I built. "Tell me again about that bridge in Ohio, Grandpa," she used to ask, climbing into my lap. Now she barely took her eyes off her phone to say hello to me in the mornings. One day, I tried to reconnect. "Tabitha, remember when we went fishing on the lake when you were 10? I asked when we happened to be alone in the kitchen. "You caught a bass so big your grandmother didn't believe it until she saw the picture." "Vaguely," she mumbled, not looking away from the phone screen. Listen, Grandpa, don't you have 50 bucks? I need a new photo editing app, really cool for Instagram. I pulled out the money, but something inside shivered. What my granddaughter remembered was not our happy moments, but that I was the source of the money. Nothing more. With each passing day, the house became less and less mine. Yvonne rehung the pictures, replacing the pictures of Elizabeth with pictures of her family. Quentin put a lock on the door of the study that used to be my workshop and turned it into his home office. Tabitha occupied the bathroom for hours, leaving her makeup products and wet towels everywhere. But the worst were the evenings when they would gather in the living room and discuss me as if I wasn't around or couldn't hear them. The doctor said dementia develops very quickly at his age, Yvonne said to Quentin in a loud whisper as I sat in the chair by the window supposedly dozing. We have to be prepared. Maybe we should think about a nursing home. Quentin replied in an even louder whisper. You have good insurance at work, it should cover it. Are you out of your mind? Yvonne was indignant, not because of the idea, but for practical reasons. His pension is barely enough to pay the bills. If he goes into a nursing home, who's going to pay for the home? Us? On my paycheck? When was the last time you brought home more than $1,000 a month? That's how I learned that my supposed dementia was just a convenient excuse for them to control my finances. There was no dementia. I had a full checkup just 6 months ago, and the doctor said I was in great shape for my age, both mentally and physically. But they've already decided for me. They've decided that I'm incapacitated, that I'm a liability, that I'm just a source of money and a roof over my head. Yesterday I found a letter from the bank in my mailbox. Yvonne usually picks up all the mail, but this time I went out before her. Turns out I only had a few $1,000s left in my account, where my main savings were kept. Someone, and I know exactly who, had been making withdrawals for the past few months. When I tried to talk to Yvonne about it, she brushed it off. You gave me power of attorney to manage your finances, Dad. Don't you remember? See, that's why I have to do it. You needed to replace the roof and pay for medical treatment. Money doesn't grow on trees. Roof. The treatments. It was all a lie. The roof had only been repaired 2 years ago, back in Elizabeth's day, and I'd had no special treatment. Just the usual 6 monthly doctor's appointments that my insurance covered. In the evening, lying in bed, I stared at the picture of Elizabeth on my bedside table, the only one Yvonne dared not remove. What am I going to do, Ellie? I whispered, touching the glass of the frame with my fingers. I've lost our daughter. She has become a stranger. In that moment, I vowed to myself that I would find a way to regain control of my life. I'd let them push me around for too long, endured humiliation in my own home for too long. Elizabeth would never have approved of that kind of treatment. She always said, "Stand up straight, Orrin. You've built bridges that can hold thousands of tons. You're stronger than you think." It was time to remember those words and act. The morning began with the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. I opened my eyes and looked at the clock. 6:30. Too early for Yvonne and her family. They usually didn't get up until 8. Pulling on my robe, I walked out of the bedroom and headed toward the sound. Tabitha was rummaging through the cabinets, moving pots and pans with a clatter. Her hair was disheveled and her face had the remnants of last night's makeup. "What are you looking for?" I asked. She flinched and turned around. "Jesus, Grandpa, scared me to death. I'm looking for that big frying pan my mom uses to make pancakes." "It's in the second cupboard on the left," I said. "But why do you need a frying pan this early?" "I just got back," she yawned. "I was at the club with the guys and then we went to Raven's, but her fridge is empty. I'm starving." I looked at my watch again. She didn't come back. She just got here, 6:30 in the morning. "Do your parents know you were out all night?" Tabitha rolled her eyes just like her mother. "Sneaking around? Really, Grandpa? I'm 23 years old. I'm a grown man." "A grown man doesn't live off his parents and grandfather," I replied, surprised at my own harshness. "A grown man works and pays his own rent." Tabitha looked hurt for a moment, but she recovered quickly. I'm looking for a job, okay? But it's all about connections these days. It's not my fault we don't have rich friends who could get me a job. Oh, by the way, oh man, we're out of eggs. She slammed the refrigerator door shut and looked at me with a sudden smile, the same smile she'd used since she was 5 when she wanted to beg for something. Grandpa, don't you have some cash? I'll run to the store for eggs and bacon, and maybe something for coffee. I sighed and went to get my wallet. When I got back, I handed her 2 20s. Thank you. She kissed me on the cheek, leaving a sticky trail of lipstick. You're the best. When the door closed behind Tabitha, I sat down at the kitchen table and thought, why did I give her money again, after I just reprimanded her for being irresponsible? It seemed to have become a habit. It was easier to pay her off than to insist. That's how I ended up in my current situation, always yielding, always trying to avoid conflict. Even with Elizabeth, I rarely argued. She was a wise woman and her decisions were usually the right ones. But after she died, I continued to live my life as if someone else was making decisions for me. First it was Yvonne, then Quentin, and now even Tabitha was twisting me around as she wished. Enough, I said out loud. It's time for a change. By 8 o'clock, Yvonne and Quentin appeared in the kitchen. She was fully dressed for work, in a smart suit. He was in a crumpled t-shirt and shorts, his face wrinkled and smelling of last night's beer. Good morning, Daddy. Yvonne poured herself a cup of coffee from the coffee maker I had turned on half an hour ago. You're up early. Tabitha woke me up when she came back from her night out, I said, watching their reactions. Yvonne frowned but didn't say anything. Quentin plopped down in the chair across from me. That girl's out of control, he muttered. No respect for her elders. I grinned. That's funny coming from you, Quentin, especially since you were discussing yesterday whether it was time to put me in a nursing home. They exchanged quick glances. Yvonne blushed. Dad, you've got it wrong. We were just discussing options. For the future. Options for what? How to get rid of the old man without losing access to his money. I was looking directly at my daughter, not averting my gaze. You see, Quentin turned to Yvonne. He's getting paranoid. That's a sign, too. A sign of what? I asked. My good hearing? Or that I'm not as stupid as you think I am? Yvonne set the cup on the table with such force that the coffee spilled over the edge. Dad, stop it. You're being unreasonable. We just want to take care of you. At your age? At my age, I interrupted her. People deserve respect, not condescending backstabbing. I built this house with my own hands. I paid for your education. I even helped with the down payment on your house, which you lost because of Quentin's failed investment. Quentin jumped up, his face red with anger. Hey, don't you dare accuse me. I was one step away from a major breakthrough. If it wasn't for the economic downturn, if it hadn't been for your stupidity and greed, I corrected. You didn't lose your house and move in with me because you wanted to take care of an old man. You just had nowhere else to go. Yvonne stepped between us. Dad, please. You've had a rough time since Mom died. You haven't been yourself. The doctor said that depression at your age can lead to personality changes. Stop it. I raised my hand, stopping this stream of lies. I'm not depressed. No personality changes either. The only thing that has changed is that I finally had an epiphany and saw what you had become. I got up from the table. Starting today, we're going to have new rules. 1. No one takes my money without my permission. 2. I own this house, and I make the decisions about it. 3. If you don't like it, you can look for another place to live. I walked out of the kitchen, feeling my heart pounding. I heard Yvonne's voice behind me. See? I told you he was getting out of control. I spent the day in the garden pruning apple trees that were beginning to go wild without proper care. Working with pruning shears was soothing. Clear, calibrated movements, understanding which branch to cut and which to leave. In engineering, too, everything was clear and logical. Calculations, drawings, structures that either stand or fall. Human relations are much more complicated. How did I manage to raise a daughter who sees me only as a burden and a source of money? Where did I go wrong? Maybe Elizabeth and I spoiled Yvonne too much. Always trying to give her the best, never saying no if we could afford it. But we taught her respect, honesty, care for her neighbors. Elizabeth took her to church every Sunday. I took her to construction sites, showed her the importance of hard work and responsibility. But what if it wasn't me, but the modern world? Everything has changed in the last 20 years. People have become more selfish, less tolerant of the elderly. Old people used to be honored for their wisdom and experience. Now we are seen as waste material, a hindrance to the young and energetic. My thoughts were interrupted by Tabitha, who came out into the garden with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Grandfather, I brought you a drink." She handed me a fogged glass. "It's hot today." I took the lemonade with suspicion. After this morning's conversation, this sudden concern seemed insincere. "Thank you," I said, taking a sip. "What brings you to the garden? You don't usually go out in the sun for fear of damaging your complexion." Tabitha laughed and sat down on the bench next to me. "You're very observant. Actually, I wanted to talk. We had a bad conversation this morning." Unfortunate is an understatement. I put the pruning shears aside and sat down next to her. "But I'm listening." She was silent, as if gathering her thoughts. "You know, Grandpa, you're right about the work. I really don't try hard enough. I don't know what I want to do. I majored in communications in college, but it's such a blurry major. All my classmates either went to graduate school or got jobs through their parents. I looked at my granddaughter, trying to see her as the little girl who once loved listening to my stories about bridges and rivers. "What do you really like to do?" I asked. "Besides nightclubs and Instagram." She smiled, but without the usual sarcasm. "You won't believe this, but I love to cook. All these weird dishes I try in the kitchen. I'm trying to create my own style. I dream of one day opening a small cafe with an unusual menu. It was a revelation. I never thought of her culinary experiments as anything serious. Why don't you go study that? Or get a job as an assistant chef somewhere?" Tabitha shook her head. "Mom thinks it's a long shot. She says that with my education I should be working in an office, not in a kitchen. And Dad, you know Dad, he thinks I should find a rich husband and not worry about it." I chuckled. Quentin seemed to be giving his daughter the same wise advice that he himself had used in life. "What do you think?" I'm afraid to try," she admitted quietly. "What if it doesn't work? What if I turn out to be untalented? It's easier to just hang out with my friends and pretend I'm fine." I looked at Tabitha and saw her not only as a spoiled girl, but also as a confused young man. Maybe all is not lost. "You know, when I started building my first bridge, I was afraid too," I said. "Afraid that the structure wouldn't hold up, that the calculations would be wrong, that I'd be embarrassed in front of everyone. But I did it anyway. And you know what? That bridge is still standing." Tabitha looked at me with interest for the first time in a long time. "You never talked about it, about your fears, I mean." "Well, no one's ever asked me," I shrugged. "Everyone thinks there's nothing left to tell at 77. That all the stories have been told long ago." We were silent. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked. Bees buzzed over the blossoming apple trees. "Grandfather," Tabitha said suddenly, "can I try to make dinner tonight? For everyone. There's a recipe I've been wanting to try for a long time." "Of course," I smiled. "It's your house, too." She stood up, but suddenly stopped. "You know, about this morning, I spent the money you gave me on groceries. Eggs, bacon, and a few other things for dinner. Just so you know." I nodded, and she went inside. Maybe all was not lost, I thought again. Maybe there's still a chance to bond with at least my granddaughter. That evening, Tabitha did make dinner. A roast chicken with some exotic herbs and spices that gave it an unusual but pleasant flavor. Yvonne and Quentin were surprised, but seemed to appreciate her efforts. "Not bad, Tubbs," Quentin said as he poured himself a second portion. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" "YouTube, Daddy," she replied. "You can learn anything there if you really want to." "You see," Yvonne turned to me, "modern technology isn't so bad. You're always grumbling about these phones and the internet, but they're good for you." I decided not to argue. The atmosphere at the table was almost peaceful, and I didn't want to ruin it. Maybe this morning's conversation had gotten them thinking, but my hope was dashed when, after dinner, Yvonne asked me to stay in the kitchen. "Daddy, I wanted to talk to you about your behavior," she began, and I knew right away where the wind was blowing. "You really upset Quentin this morning. He's doing the best he can, but the economic situation is difficult." "Yvonne," I interrupted her, "Quentin is 45 years old. He's a grown man. If he's having trouble getting a job, he can go to work as a waiter or a cab driver. Any honest labor is better than sitting at home and wasting my money." Her face contorted with anger. "How can you do that? He's the father of my child, your granddaughter." "That doesn't make him untouchable," I replied. "I let you into my house because you are my family, but that doesn't mean I have to keep healthy adults who can work." Yvonne squinted her eyes. "So, you're changing the rules of the game? First you invite us to live with you and now you're putting conditions on us?" "I didn't change any rules. I'm just finally talking about what's going on. You're living in my house, spending my money, and you're talking about putting me in a nursing home." "I never said anything about a nursing home," Yvonne exclaimed. "It was just a hypothetical discussion about the future." "My future is my home," I said firmly. "And if you can't respect me and my decisions, perhaps you should consider another home." Yvonne turned pale. You're kicking us out?" "No. I'm saying there have to be rules in this house, and the most important rule is respect, mutual respect. I respect you as adults and I expect the same in return." She was silent for a moment, as if digesting my words. Then her face returned to that look of condescending concern that I hated so much. "Dad, I understand that you're upset. Maybe we should talk to your doctor about adjusting your medication. These mood swings." I walked silently out of the kitchen. It's no use. She can't hear me. She doesn't want to hear me. In my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at Elizabeth's picture. What would she do in my shoes? My Ellie always had a knack for finding the right words to get through to people, but even she probably would have given up in the face of such a wall of incomprehension. I woke up the next morning with a determination to act. The house was slowly waking up. I could hear Yvonne's footsteps getting ready for work, the sound of water in the bathroom where Quentin was probably taking a shower. Tabitha was still asleep, of course. She rarely got up before noon. I got dressed and left the bedroom. In the kitchen, Yvonne was packing a bag for work. "Good morning, Daddy," she said, as if yesterday's conversation had never happened. "I left you some oatmeal on the stove. And don't forget to take your pills." "Thank you," I replied. "Yvonne, I've been meaning to ask. Do you remember that wooden file box that stood in my office? It's in Quentin's office now." She froze for a moment. "I think I do." "Why?" "I need to check some papers. Insurance papers, Will. Can you ask Quentin to find that drawer?" "Why do you need the will?" Yvonne's tensed up right away. "Are you up to something?" "No, I just want to make sure everything's in order. At my age, you have to have up-to-date documents." She looked at me suspiciously, but nodded. "Okay, I'll tell Quentin. But Dad, don't do anything stupid, okay? We care about you, really." When she left, I sat down at the table and thought. Of course, there was no need to look for a box. All the important documents had long been stored in a safe deposit box. But I needed to check Yvonne's reaction, and I got it. They're afraid I'll change the will, that I'll disinherit them. That's been their main fear all along. Not my health, not my well-being, but the money and the house they expect to inherit when I die. And suddenly, it hit me. The solution was simple and obvious. If all they see in me is a source of money, then they must be deprived of that source. Not when I die right now. But how could I do that? I couldn't just kick them out. No matter what, they were my family. And I didn't want to be alone, without a roof over my head. I began to think about a plan. It had to be thorough and thoughtful. No spontaneous decisions. After all, I am an engineer. Engineers don't do things at random. The first step is to consult with an attorney. Need to know what my options are from a legal standpoint. The second step is a financial plan. Where am I going to live? With what? The third step is the execution itself. In that moment, sitting at the kitchen table with my oatmeal cooling, I made a decision that would change everything. I would no longer silently tolerate neglect in my own home. I would no longer be a source of money for people who disrespected me. I would regain control of my life. Elizabeth would be proud. She always said, "Orrin, sometimes you have to destroy an old bridge to build a new, stronger one." It was time to tear down that rotten bridge and start building a new one. Over the next few days, I met secretly with a lawyer. His name was Perry Hamish, an elderly gentleman with a neat gray beard and shrewd eyes. We'd known each other since I'd worked on the Maumee River Bridge. He represented the construction company then, and we often argued about technical details and safety. But eventually we found common ground and even became friends. "So you want to change the will?" Perry asked when I had explained the situation to him. We were sitting in a small cafe 2 blocks from my house. I'd chosen this place deliberately. There was little chance that anyone in my family would happen to stop by. "Not just the will," I said. "I want to see what my options are for the house. Can I give it to someone outside the family?" Perry sipped his coffee and rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "The house is all yours, right? No co-owners, no mortgage. It's clean. Elizabeth and I paid off the last installment 20 years ago. Then you can have it any way you want. Sell it, gift it, bequeath it to whomever you want. There are options with trust funds, charitable organizations." He thought for a moment. "But let me ask you something, Orrin. Are you sure you want to cut off your daughter completely?" "It's a big step." I sighed and looked out the window. A young couple and their child were walking down the street. A boy about 3 years old was jumping happily through cracks in the sidewalk, and his parents were looking at him fondly. "You know, Perry, I've been thinking about this for a long time. Yvonne is my daughter, and I love her. But the way she and her family have treated me over the last few years, it's not love anymore, it's exploitation. They see me as an ATM machine and a nuisance at the same time. They're discussing how they can put me in a nursing home and get their hands on my money." Perry frowned. "That sounds unpleasant, but have you considered other options? Maybe you should try family therapy?" I grinned bitterly. "Yvonne thinks I have senile dementia. Anything I disagree with her is interpreted as a sign of dementia. There's no therapy for that." We had a long discussion about the legalities. In the end, I decided to change my will, transferring the house to a charitable organization that helps veteran builders, people who, like me, have spent their lives building something strong and durable. I decided to withdraw some of my savings in cash, for myself, for the first time in my new life. "Are you sure you can manage on your own?" Perry asked me one last time. "I've relied on myself all my life," I answered. "At 77, it's not too late to remember that habit." Friday night, Yvonne announced at dinner that she had prepared something special. Usually, dinners were held in tense silence, punctuated only by the sound of cutlery and the occasional phrase about the weather or the news. But tonight there was wine on the table, and even Tabitha had gotten off the phone to help set up. "What's the occasion?" I asked, taking my usual seat at the head of the table. "Quentin has good news." Yvonne smiled and winked at her husband. "He'll tell you himself." Quentin coughed and straightened up in his chair. "I got an offer from a new pharmaceutical startup. They want me to head up their sales force in the Midwest." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. Maybe this would finally solve their financial problems. When do you start? Well, there's a nuance. Quentin looked at Yvonne. The company's office is in Chicago. We're going to have to move. Move? I was surprised. All of us? We're all going to Chicago, Dad, Yvonne said as she put the roast on the plates. We've already looked for a nice apartment near the lake. I felt something cold clench inside me. What about me? Everyone stopped talking. Tabitha stared down at her plate. Quentin took a big sip of wine. Yvonne coughed. Well, we thought. You're coming with us too, of course. We'll find you a good place. Maybe a nursing home with good care, not far from us. Nursing home, I repeated slowly. What about my house? There was silence again. Then Quentin coughed. We were thinking of selling it. Real estate prices in Toledo are good now. The proceeds would go toward your retirement and a down payment on an apartment in Chicago. I looked at them, and I couldn't believe my ears. They'd already made up their minds. Without me. Sell my house, put me in a nursing home, and use the money for themselves. And when were you going to tell me this? I asked, trying to speak calmly. Well, we are. Yvonne smiled as if she didn't notice my tension. Quentin just got the final confirmation from the company yesterday. And you've already picked out a nursing home for me? Without me? Dad, don't be so dramatic, Yvonne sighed irritably. It's not like we're sending you anywhere. I've personally checked several options. There are good conditions, medical care. And you asked me if I wanted it. I raised my voice, feeling the anger rising inside me. Do I want to sell the house I built with my own hands? Do I want to spend the rest of my life among old strangers, waiting for your rare visit? Dad, don't start, Tabitha interjected. We're all going to Chicago together. It's going to be awesome. Big city, so many opportunities. It might be cool for you, I said, but for me, it means losing everything I care about. Oren, be reasonable, Quentin leaned forward. It's dangerous to live alone at your age, and we can't be torn between taking care of you and working in another city. So don't be torn. Leave me alone. I'll get along just fine without your care. Yvonne angrily tapped her palm on the table. You see, Quentin? I told you he'd be stubborn. Dad, you're acting like a child. This decision was made with your best interests in mind. My best interests? I almost yelled. Since when do my best interests include losing my home and my freedom? Since you got too old to make sensible decisions, Yvonne snapped at me. You're always forgetting things, getting confused about the days of the week, talking to a picture of your mom. I'm not out of my mind, if that's what you're implying, I said quietly but firmly. And I'm not going to let you take over my life or my property. Oh, come on, Quentin waved his hand. What are you going to do with this house all by yourself? It's too big for you. It needs maintenance, repairs, and the money from the sale will ensure you a comfortable old age. And the down payment on your apartment, I added. Don't forget that detail. It doesn't matter. Yvonne splashed her hands. It's family money. We've taken care of you all these years, and now that we have a chance at a normal life, you want to ruin it with your stubbornness. Cared? I laughed unhappily. You moved in with me because you lost your own house to Quentin's stupidity. You live on my pension, spend my savings, and yet you talk behind my back about getting rid of me. Because it's impossible to discuss anything with you, screamed Yvonne. You take everything in stride. We're trying to get on with our lives, and all you can think about is your bloody house and money. My house and my money, I corrected, and I'm not going to let you take it away. Yvonne jumped up from her chair, her face red with anger. You're insufferable. A selfish old man who thinks only of himself. Mom was the only one who could tolerate you, and that was probably just out of pity. I stood up too, resting my hands on the table. Don't you dare talk about your mother like that. She loved me, and I loved her. Just because you and Quentin don't have that relationship doesn't give you the right to insult our memory. What memory? Yvonne shook her head. All you do is live in the past. Mom died 3 years ago, and you're still sitting over her picture as if she's coming back. It's time to live in the present, Dad. We're your family, we're alive, we're here, and we make decisions. You're making decisions behind my back, I said. You're planning to sell my house and put me in an orphanage without even asking my opinion. What kind of family are you? What kind of father are you? Yvonne retorted. Always in his bridges and blueprints, never interested in my life. Even now, when Quentin finally has a chance for a normal career, you only think about your own comfort. I shook my head, not believing my ears. Was this really how she had perceived my attitude all these years? Me, who worked 60 hours a week to provide her with the best education. Me, who went to all her school concerts even if I had to take time off work. Me, who gave all my savings to her wedding to Quentin, even though I doubted him even then. You know what, Yvonne, I said quietly, I'm disappointed, not in you, in myself, because I must have raised a man who is incapable of gratitude and respect. Shut up, widower, Yvonne suddenly shouted, and everyone at the table froze. Just shut up. You don't know anything about modern life. You sit here with your outdated principles and try to teach us. We're going to Chicago, period. You either come with us to the nursing home or stay here and bend your proud back all alone. Shut up, widower. The words hung in the air like a slap in the face. Tabitha stared at her mother with wide eyes. Quentin squirmed awkwardly in his chair. And I suddenly felt strangely relieved, as if I'd made a decision I'd been putting off for a long time. Without a word, I got up from the table and headed for the door. Daddy, wait. Yvonne's voice sounded less confident. I didn't mean to. It just came out. But I was already out of the room and up the stairs to my bedroom. There, in silence, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the picture of Elizabeth. This is it, Ellie, I said quietly. Now I know what to do. I couldn't sleep all night. Memories swirled in my head of how Elizabeth and I had bought this house, how we'd fixed it up, how happy we'd been when Yvonne had been born. Our daughter's first steps on this very floor, the first day of school, the graduation, the wedding. How could we have come to the point where now she calls me widower with such anger, as if my grief were a crime? By morning, the plan was finally formed in my head. I waited for Yvonne to leave for work, Quentin to leave for another business event, which was probably a meeting with friends at a bar, and Tabitha to go shopping with her friends. Pulling an old suitcase out of the closet, I started packing the essentials: clothes, toiletries, medications, a silver-framed picture of Elizabeth, a few books, a folder of important documents that I had thoughtfully taken from the safe deposit box as recently as last week. Then I sat down at my desk and began to write a letter. I wrote it long, choosing my words carefully. I didn't want it to seem like an act of revenge, but rather a necessary step to preserve my dignity. Dear Yvonne, Quentin, and Tabitha, when you read this letter, I will no longer be in the house. I have made the decision to start a new chapter of my life, without you. Yesterday's conversation has convinced me that we can no longer live together. You see me only as a burden and a source of money, and I can't and won't accept that attitude. Yvonne, I've always loved you and tried to be a good father. It's a shame you don't appreciate that. Shut up, widower, were words I'll never forget. They showed me how deep the gulf between us was. As for the house, I don't own it anymore. I've signed it over to a charity for veterans of the construction industry. You have 3 months to find a new place to live, after which the foundation will put the house up for sale. All the accounts I had in the bank are closed. The money's been withdrawn. Don't try to find me. I don't want you to know where I am or how I live. Tabitha, I still believe you have a chance to be better than your parents. Think about your life and the kind of person you want to be. Goodbye, Orrin. After rereading the letter, I sealed it in an envelope and put it on the kitchen table where they would be sure to find it. Then I picked up my suitcase, took one last look at the house that had been my home for almost 50 years, and walked out, closing the door behind me. I walked down the familiar streets of Toledo, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. There was uncertainty ahead, but also freedom. I was no longer a prisoner in my own home, an object of neglect from my own family. At the bank, I cashed my last check, the money from the sale of the stock Elizabeth and I had bought back in the 80s. The amount was more than enough to provide me with a comfortable life for several years to come. Then I got into a cab and gave the address of a small hotel on the outskirts of the city. I had booked a room there yesterday after dinner when I realized that the decision was final. "Are you moving somewhere?" the cab driver asked in a friendly manner, nodding at my suitcase. "Yes," I answered, looking out the window at the familiar streets floating by. "I'm starting a new life." "At your age?" He looked at me in the rearview mirror, surprised. "At my age," I nodded. "There's no time for compromise." The cab stopped in front of a modest 3-story hotel building. I paid, grabbed my suitcase, and stepped inside, feeling more and more free with each step. After checking in and going up to my room, I went to the window. I couldn't see my old house from here, and that was for the best. I didn't want to look back. Only forward to a new life where I would be respected, if only because I had learned to respect myself. My new life began in room number 208 of the Pinewood Inn. The room was small but clean. A bed, a bedside table, a desk with a lamp, a closet, and a small television on the wall. The bathroom, though cramped, contained everything she needed. After decades of living in a spacious house, this room seemed tiny but oddly cozy. There was no history here, no memories, no ghosts of the past, just the present. The first morning in the new place, I woke up unusually early 5:30. It was just beginning to dawn outside the window. I lay there for a few minutes, remembering where I was and why. Then my thoughts jumped to my former family. I wondered if they had found the letter yet. How did Yvonne feel when she realized I was gone for good? Anger? Fear? Regret? Shaking my head, I pushed those thoughts away. This was no longer my concern. I'd made my choice, and now I had to focus on my future, not their reactions. After showering and dressing, I walked down to the hotel lobby. The small dining room offered breakfast. Nothing special, the standard set: cereal, toast, jam, coffee. But it was the first breakfast I'd had in years that I could choose for myself without Yvonne telling me that at your age you should eat oatmeal or you can't have coffee. I put on some toast with jam and poured myself a cup of strong black coffee. At a neighboring table sat an elderly couple quietly chatting about their plans for the day. At the exit, a young man in a business suit hurriedly swallowed his breakfast, glancing at his watch. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. After breakfast, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The hotel was in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Toledo, near a park. The day promised to be warm and sunny, perfect for a leisurely stroll. I walked along the paths of the park, watching morning joggers, moms with strollers, and dog walkers walking their pets. Suddenly, someone called out to me, "Orrin? Orrin Stout? No way!" I turned around and saw a gray-haired man walking a small dachshund on a leash. His face looked familiar, but I couldn't remember his name. "It's me, Lawrence Teller," he exclaimed as he came closer. "We worked together on the Momi Bridge, remember? I was the safety inspector." Now I remembered Lawrence, or Larry as we called him, was a pedantic inspector who pestered everyone with his nagging about the smallest details. But it was through his persistence that we fixed several potentially dangerous design flaws. "Larry, of course I remember," I shook his hand. "How many years has it been?" 20, 30. 32 years and 4 months to be exact," Larry smiled. I still remembered the date the bridge opened, March 7th of 93. Typical Larry, precise to the last detail. "How are you? What are you doing in this part of town?" he asked me. "I thought you lived in that big house in the Oak Quarter." I hesitated for a moment. Should I tell him the whole story of me leaving my family? We hadn't seen each other in over 30 years. I decided to make a change of scenery, I said evasively. I stayed at the Pinewood Inn for a while. Larry nodded understandingly, though he clearly didn't understand. You're renovating the house? Margaret and I once stayed in a hotel for 2 weeks while we changed the floors. Something like that. I decided to change the subject. How about you? You still working? I retired 5 years ago. It's just Spot and me now. He nodded at the dachshund sniffing at a bush. Margaret died 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm so sorry, I said sincerely. Elizabeth, too. 3 years ago. We were silent for a moment, honoring our wives. Listen, Larry suddenly perked up. I live 2 blocks from here. Why don't you come over for lunch? Just like old times, we could sit and talk about bridges and roads. I hesitated. On the one hand, I didn't want to impose and talk about my problems. On the other hand, the idea of having lunch in the company of an old acquaintance was pleasant. I'd love to, I said at last. Larry's house turned out to be a modest but cozy bungalow-style building with a neat garden. Everything inside breathed neatness, a typical dwelling of a pedantic engineer. On the walls hung pictures of various bridges and infrastructure projects he'd worked on. Larry had prepared a simple but tasty lunch, roast beef sandwiches, salad, and iced tea. We sat on the veranda enjoying the warm day and leisurely conversation. We recalled old colleagues, projects we worked on, funny incidents from the past. Remember that contractor who tried to save money on rebar? Larry laughed. What was his name? Johnson? Jackson? Jameson, I corrected him, smiling too. You made such a scene the whole office came to see. He wanted to use rebar 10% thinner than the specs. Can you imagine what could have happened? We laughed some more, and then the conversation took a more serious turn. You still haven't told me why you're staying in a hotel, Larry said, pouring more tea. Did something happen to your house? I sighed. Why not tell me? Larry was a good man, and I needed to talk. I left my family, I said bluntly. Or rather, my daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter, who had lived in my house for the past 3 years and treated me like a free ATM machine and a burden at the same time. Larry didn't look shocked, just nodded thoughtfully. Go on. And I told him everything, how Yvonne and her family had moved in with me after Elizabeth's death, how things had gradually deteriorated, how they'd spent my money and discussed putting me in a nursing home. I told them about the ill-fated dinner, the words, "Shut up, widower," and how I changed my will and left, leaving them a letter. When I finished, Larry was silent for a long time, then said quietly, You did the right thing, Orrin. You can't let anyone, not even your own children, rob you of your dignity. But I feel guilty, I admitted, like I've abandoned my family. They abandoned you first, Larry countered. When they stopped seeing you as a father and a grandfather and started seeing you as a nuisance and a wallet, we talked for a few more hours. Larry told me how he'd dealt with loneliness after Margaret's death, how he'd found new hobbies. He'd started making miniature models of the bridges he'd worked on during his career. Would you like to take a look? He offered, and we went into his garage, which had been converted into a workshop. There, on long tables, stood dozens of amazingly detailed models of bridges, from simple arch bridges to complex suspension structures. Each model was signed, the name of the bridge, the year it was built, the location. It's amazing, I sincerely admired. How long does it take to make one model? From a week to a month, depending on the complexity. Larry proudly pointed to the largest model, an exact replica of the Golden Gate in San Francisco, about a meter long. This one took 2 months. But you know what the most important thing is? It gives me a purpose. Waking up every morning thinking, I'm going to finish this section today, is what keeps me motivated. I'm thinking. Purpose. That's what I've been missing for the last few years. After retirement, after Elizabeth died, I just existed day to day without a clear purpose. You need to find something like that too, Larry said, as if he'd read my mind. Something that will be yours, only yours, without family interference. By the time I left Larry's, it was almost 6 o'clock in the evening. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet up in a couple days. As I drove back to the hotel, I felt strangely exhilarated. It was as if meeting Larry had opened up new possibilities for me. Maybe my new life wouldn't be so lonely and aimless. At the hotel, the receptionist handed me a note. "There have been several calls for you, Mr. Stout. Some woman, very excited." She left her number and asked me to call back urgently. I took the note and saw the receptionist's handwriting, Yvonne Hume, daughter, and a phone number I knew perfectly well. "Thank you," I said, folding the note and putting it in my pocket. "But I won't be calling back." The receptionist looked at me in surprise but didn't say anything. None of his business. In my room, I turned on the TV and tried to distract myself from the thoughts of what was happening in my former home. But my imagination drew pictures one more vivid than the next. Yvonne comes home from work, goes into the kitchen and sees an envelope on the table. At first, she doesn't pay attention. She thinks it's a bill or an advertisement. Then she sees my name in my handwriting. She opens it, reads it. Her face changes from bewilderment to shock, then to panic. She rushes to check my room. It's empty. She calls my cell phone, but I don't answer. She dials Quentin's number, yells into the phone, "Dad's gone," and he's rewritten the house. Quentin rushes home. They read the letter over and over, not believing their eyes. "He couldn't have done that. It's our house." Yvonne will scream. "There must be some explanation. Maybe he was just upset and decided to scare us." Quentin will reassure her. "They'll start calling all the hospitals, hotels, acquaintances, everywhere I could be. And then Tabitha will come and they'll show her the letter. What will she think? Will she be upset? Or would she just shrug and say, 'Grandpa's out of his mind'?" I sighed and changed the channel. It was useless to imagine their reaction. What's done is done. I'm not coming back and they'll have to accept the new reality, without me and without my house. My phone rang. Yvonne's number. I dropped the call and muted it. A minute later, a message came through. "Dad, please call me back. We need to talk. There's been some kind of misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? Well, typical Yvonne, denying the obvious, looking for excuses, trying to manipulate my feelings. But her tactics wouldn't work this time. I deleted the message without a reply. For the next 2 hours, my phone vibrated with incoming calls and messages every 5 to 10 minutes. Yvonne, Quentin, even Tabitha tried to contact me. I ignored them all. Finally, unable to endure this siege, I simply turned my phone off. I slept a surprisingly restful night. No nightmares, no guilt. Just a deep, restorative sleep like I hadn't had in a long time. In the morning, over breakfast, I pondered Larry's words about purpose. What do I want to do in my new life? What will bring me fulfillment and meaning? Suddenly, it hit me. I've always loved to draw. In my youth, I even considered becoming an architect, but pragmatism took over and I chose engineering. But why not return to this hobby now? I have enough free time and money to buy everything I need. With this thought in mind, I went to the city center, to the art store. I bought a drawing album, a set of pencils, watercolor paints and brushes. The saleswoman, a young woman with dreadlocks, watched with interest as I meticulously chose my materials. "Are you an artist?" she asked as she packed up my purchases. "I used to be," I replied. "A long time ago. And now I decided to remember an old hobby." "That's great," she smiled sincerely. "It's never too late to go back to what you love." I smiled back, feeling a strange kinship with this stranger, who unwittingly confirmed the correctness of my choice. Back at the hotel, I turned on my phone and saw dozens of missed calls and messages. The last one was from Yvonne, sent an hour ago. "Dad, we were at the bank. Is it true? Did you really cash everything in? And has the house really been rewritten? What do we do now? Please answer." I pictured them sitting in the bank and the manager explaining to them that, yes, all accounts are closed, the money has been withdrawn, and no, they can't get information about where that money was transferred to. Then they probably went to my lawyer, Perry, but he, true to his word, refused to discuss the details of the change of will with them, citing confidentiality. And now they're sitting in my former home, a house that in 3 months will no longer be their home, trying to realize what has happened, that they have truly lost everything: my support, the roof over their heads, their financial security, everything they took for granted and didn't appreciate. For a moment, I felt a prick of regret. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe I should have given them another chance. But then I remembered all the humiliation, all the talking behind their backs, all the times they ignored my wants and needs, and especially those awful words, "Shut up, widower." No, I did everything right. They got exactly what they deserved. I turned off my phone and opened a new sketchbook. I picked up a pencil and began sketching the outline of the Momi River Bridge, my first serious project, my pride. The lines were confidently laid down on the paper, as if my hand remembered every curve of the structure, every detail. I drew and felt the return of the forgotten pleasure of creativity. In the evening I met Larry again, this time in a small restaurant near the hotel. I showed him my first sketches and he nodded approvingly. "It's a great start to a new life, Oren. Creativity heals the soul better than any medicine." "You know," I said, sipping my coffee, "I'm thinking of looking for a long-term apartment. It's convenient to live in a hotel, but it's expensive and I'd like to have my own space." "That's a good idea," Larry agreed. "I can help you with the search if you want. There are some decent senior complexes in our area with amenities and everything you need." "That would be great," I thanked him. "Just don't want anything specifically for seniors. I don't like to be defined by my age." Larry laughed. "You've always been stubborn, Oren. Even 30 years ago. Glad to see that some things don't change." We talked until the restaurant closed, discussing plans for the future, reminiscing about the past, building new bridges no longer across rivers, but between our lives. Back at the hotel, I turned on my phone again. There were no new messages. I guess the family realized I wasn't going to answer. Or maybe they were still in shock at the realization that I had indeed gone and robbed them of everything they thought was rightfully theirs. I lay in bed and closed my eyes, feeling strangely peaceful. Yes, I had lost my family, but I had found freedom and dignity, and perhaps I had found a new purpose in life. Before I went to bed, I looked at Elizabeth's picture, which I placed on my bedside table. "You'd be pleased, Ellie," I whispered. I had finally done what I should have done a long time ago. I was myself again. It had been 2 weeks since I'd left my house and started a new life. With Larry's help, I found a small but cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Toledo. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a 3-story brick building, 1-bedroom, a living room combined with a kitchen, and a small balcony overlooking a green courtyard. The rent was reasonable and the location was convenient, not far from the park where we met Larry and only a 20-minute walk from his house. Setting up the new place was unexpectedly pleasant. I bought only the essentials: a bed, a table, a couple of chairs, and bookshelves. I hung my first drawings on the walls, still tentative, but getting better every day. At the local thrift store, I found an old easel and a set of oil paints, and now I started every morning with an hour of painting. My financial situation was stable. The money I had withdrawn from my accounts before I left was sitting in a new account at another bank. My pension as a bridge engineer plus Social Security benefits provided me with a comfortable existence. I could afford to eat out at restaurants a couple times a week, buy books and art supplies, even save a small amount each month. One morning, while painting on the balcony, I was trying to capture an old oak tree in the yard. I heard a voice from downstairs. "Hey, Upstairs. You're doing pretty good. I looked down and saw a woman about my age with short gray hair and wearing gardening gloves. She was standing by a bed of flowers and looked up at me with a smile. "Thank you," I replied, "just starting to learn the art." "It's never too late to start something new." She took off her gloves and held her hand up as if to shake it. "I'm Helen Vaughn. I live in apartment 101 right below you." "Orin Stout," I introduced myself. "Pleased to meet you." "If you don't mind, I'd like to take a closer look at your work sometime," she suggested. "I used to teach art in high school. Maybe I could give you some tips." We agreed to meet in the evening in the common courtyard. I was pleasantly surprised. I think I was starting to make some new acquaintances. First Larry, now Helen. Maybe old age loneliness isn't as inevitable as I thought. In the evening, Helen and I sat on a bench in the yard. She scrutinized my drawings, sometimes nodding, sometimes frowning. "You have a good eye for perspective," she said at last. "Not surprising if you were an engineer. But you're too timid with color. Don't be afraid to experiment, to use bright colors." "Experimentation is not welcome in engineering," I smiled. "We prefer precision and predictability." "Well, art is not a bridge," Helen laughed. "If the line goes wrong, no one dies." We talked until dusk. Helen told me that she had been widowed 5 years ago and had moved to this house to be closer to her son and his family. But she doesn't see them as often as she'd like. They have their own lives, work, children. "And you?" she asked. "Do you have children?" I hesitated to answer. Should I tell her the truth? About how my daughter had betrayed me, how I'd left my own home. But then I decided there was no point in hiding it. It would come out sooner or later. "There is a daughter," I answered. "But we don't communicate. It's a complicated relationship." Helen nodded understandingly, not asking further, and I was grateful for her delicacy. Every day my new life became more fulfilling. I painted in the mornings, then walked in the park or went to the local library where I signed up for a computer literacy course for the elderly. I met Larry twice a week to play chess or just talk about life. In the evenings, I often had tea with Helen, who gave me drawing lessons and told me funny stories from her teaching practice. On one such evening, about a month after I had left home, the doorbell rang. I opened it and saw Yvonne on the doorstep. She looked gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes, the same business blouse and skirt she wore to work, looked wrinkled as if she'd slept in them. "Daddy," she exhaled, "I finally found you." I stared at her in silence, not inviting her in. How had she gotten my address? She must have hired a private investigator or just called every real estate agency in town. "Can I come in?" she asked after a pause. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, letting her into the apartment. Yvonne looked around with obvious surprise, probably expecting something more squalid, confirming her notion that I'd be lost without her. "Nice place you've got here," she said, a note of disappointment in her voice. "What do you want, Yvonne?" I asked bluntly. She lowered herself into the chair without waiting for an invitation. "Dad, this situation, it's crazy. You can't just wipe out your whole family over one stupid fight." "It wasn't just a fight," I replied calmly. "It was the last straw. You treated me like a burden and an ATM at the same time for years. You planned to put me in a nursing home and sell my house. And you called me a widower with such disdain, as if my grieving for your mother was something shameful." Yvonne shook her head. "I was upset, Daddy. You don't compromise. You don't realize the world has changed. Quentin finally had a chance at a good job and you ruined everything with your stubbornness." "I haven't ruined anything," I countered. "Quentin can still go to Chicago and work for his drug company, just without my house and my money." "But how are we going to live?" There were tears in her voice. "We have to move out in 2 months. Where are we going to get the money for a new place? To move? For a down payment on an apartment in Chicago? That's it. The real reason she's here. Not concern for me, not remorse, but money." "And how did you plan to live if I agreed to your plan?" I asked. Put me in a nursing home, sell the house, take the money and leave. Had you thought about how I would live? Yvonne looked away. We'd find you a good place, with care, with medical care, with 4 walls and a view of the parking lot, I finished for her. Without my books, without my garden, without my freedom, while you'd be enjoying life in Chicago with the money from the sale of my house. You're unfair. She wiped away a tear. We've taken care of you all these years. No, Yvonne. You've been living off me all these years. That's different. She suddenly changed tactics, her voice softer. Dad, please. We can fix this. Come home. We'll find a way for you to stay in Toledo and we'll go to Chicago. Maybe we can rent something modest there until we get back on our feet. And then, I interrupted, when you get on your feet, what will happen to me? More talk about the nursing home. Plans to spend my money again? No, it's going to be different, I promise. She's stepping forward. We'll come every weekend, we'll call every day. I raised my hand, stopping this stream of empty promises. Yvonne, I've made my decision. I've started a new life, without you, and I'm not going back. But the house, she hesitated. It's our family home. Mom would have wanted it to stay in the family. Don't use your mother's memory for manipulation, I said stiffly. Elizabeth wanted her daughter to grow up to be a decent person who respected her parents. But something had gone wrong. Yvonne stood up, her face contorted with anger. You're going to regret this, she hissed. When you're all alone, when there's no one to give you a glass of water or call an ambulance, you'll remember this conversation. Maybe, I agreed. But now I have new friends, new interests, and the freedom to decide my own destiny. And that's worth the risk. She left, slamming the door. I sat back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sad that my own daughter sees me only as a source of money, and relief that I no longer succumbed to her manipulations. A week later, Quentin showed up. He was more direct. Listen, Oren, he said, leaning back in my chair. Let's be honest. You're offended. We get it. But this is too much. To disinherit your own daughter, to sign over the house to some foundation. It's just petty. Petty? I looked at him with surprise. Planning how to get rid of an old man and take over his property isn't petty? No one was planning to get rid of you, Quentin said. Yes, we discussed the possibility of a nursing home, but only because we were worried about your health. You know how dangerous it is to live alone at your age. And yet, here I am, living alone, and I haven't died yet, I remarked dryly. Quentin rolled his eyes. All right, to hell with these games. Here's my proposal. You cancel the whole charity thing, return the house to Yvonne, and we split the cost in half. Half for you to live on, half for us to move to Chicago. Everybody's happy. I looked at him and I couldn't believe the nerve of him. Quentin, are you seriously suggesting I give you half the value of my house for nothing? For what? For being your family, for crying out loud, he raised his voice. Family supports each other. You can't just take us and leave us homeless. You're adults with education and jobs, I replied calmly. Find a rented apartment like millions of other people do. Live within your means. Work. Fuck you, Quentin spat out, standing up. You're gonna regret this. When you go down with a stroke or a fracture, don't expect us to rush to your rescue. I don't, I replied. I had already realized that I could only count on myself. After he left, I stood at the window for a long time looking out at the street. Strangely, their threats no longer frightened me. Maybe I would really be alone in my old age. Maybe it would be hard for me, but it would be my life, my decision, my dignity. At the beginning of the 3rd month after I left, Tabitha came in. Of the 3, she seemed the most sincere. Grandfather, I'm not here for money, she said, refusing the tea. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine, Tabitha, I said, taking a seat across from her. As you can see, I'm not poor. She looked around at my drawings. Did you draw these? Not bad. Thank you. New hobby. We were silent for a moment, then she asked, "Why did you do that to us?" I know Mom was wrong to say what she said. What she said. But to take away our house, all our money, that's cruel, Grandpa. I sighed. Tabitha, it wasn't an impulsive act. I'd put up with years of neglect, manipulation, talking behind my back. You all saw me as nothing more than a nuisance and a source of money. And when your mother called me widower with such contempt, that was the last straw. But what was my fault? There was resentment in her voice. I've never treated you badly. Not badly, but not well, I answered. You took my wallet when you needed money and ignored me when I tried to talk to you. Remember our conversation in the garden about your dream of becoming a chef? It was the only sincere conversation between us in years. She lowered her eyes. I know. I'm sorry. I've been, selfish. All I thought about was myself, my problems. And now? I asked. What do you plan to do? Mom found an apartment, a cheaper one, in a not-so-great neighborhood. Dad got that job in Chicago after all, but there's no money to move the whole family. So he'll go by himself, rent a room there, and send money to us. I nodded. Maybe it would be a good experience for them to learn to live within their means, to appreciate what they have. And you? I asked. What are your plans? Tabitha smiled suddenly. I found a job at a small cafe as a cook's assistant. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start. The owner said that if I do well, she can promote me to assistant cook in 6 months. That's great, I said, genuinely happy. So you decided to follow your dream? I've been thinking a lot since you left, she admitted, about how we lived, how we treated you, and how I don't want to live like that. Always depending on someone else, asking for money, not developing. You were right in the garden. It's time to grow up. We talked for another hour or so. Tabitha told me about her work, her plans for the future. I showed her my drawings, told her about my new friends. As she left, I felt a little regret. She seemed to be the only one in the family who had a chance for real change. Could I come over sometime? She asked at the door. Just to talk, to show you new recipes I'm learning. I hesitated. Wouldn't that be the first step to getting back on track? But then I decided to give her a chance. It's okay, I said, but just you alone, without your parents. It's a deal. She smiled and, unexpectedly for me, hugged me. Thank you, Grandpa. 2 days after Tabitha's visit, I received a letter from the charity to which I had signed over the house. They informed me that the Hume family had vacated the premises and the house would be put up for sale shortly. Part of the proceeds, according to my will, would go to scholarships for young engineers and part would go to help elderly builders in difficult circumstances. I folded the letter and walked over to my easel. Today, I was working on a new painting, a view from my balcony of the park in the distance. Helen said I was getting better at perspective and the play of light. In the evening, Larry, Helen, and I gathered at a local cafe. It had become our tradition to have dinner together once a week, to discuss news, plans, just to enjoy each other's company. Sometimes we were joined by Doris, the librarian from the reading room where I spent a lot of time, sometimes by Martin, a retired policeman we met at a computer course. How are things going with the new painting? Helen asked when we were settled at the table. I'm making progress, I replied, but I still can't get the color of the sky at sunset right. You can show it tomorrow and I'll give you a hint, she smiled. You really have a talent, Orrin. It's a pity you didn't start painting sooner. It's never too late, Larry remarked, raising his glass. Here's to new beginnings at any age. We clinked glasses and I thought about how my life had changed over the months. From a lonely old man enduring humiliation in his own home to a man surrounded by friends, doing what he loves, living life to the fullest. Yes, I lost my family, or rather, the illusion of a family. But I gained much more: freedom, dignity, new relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. As I drove home that evening, I thought of the words Elizabeth had once said to me: "Orrin, it's never too late to start over. The key is to have the courage to take the first step." I had taken that step. And now I was walking on a new bridge, a bridge that led not to a past full of bitterness and disappointment, but to a future that I had chosen for myself.